G'day you mob, Pete here, and this is another episode of Aussie English, the number one place for anyone and everyone wanting to learn Australian English. So today I have a Goss episode for you where I sit down with my old man, my father, Ian Smisson, and we talk about the week's news, whether locally down under here in Australia or non-locally overseas in other parts of the world. Okay, and we sometimes also talk about whatever comes to mind, right? If we can think of something interesting to share with you guys related to us or Australia, we also talk about that in the Goss. So these episodes are specifically designed to try and give you content about many different topics where we're obviously speaking in English and there are multiple people having a natural and spontaneous conversation in English. So it is particularly good to improve your listening skills. In order to complement that though, I really recommend that you join the podcast membership or the academy membership at aussieenglish.com.au, where you will get access to the full transcripts of these episodes, the PDFs, the downloads, and you can also use the online PDF reader to read and listen at the same time. Okay, so if you really want to improve your listening skills fast, get the transcript, listen and read at the same time, keep practicing, and that is the quickest way to level up your English. Anyway, I've been rabbiting on a bit. I've been talking a bit. Let's just get into this episode, guys. Smack the bird, and let's get into it. Yeah, so shearer shortage driving record prices for Australian white shedding sheep. I had never heard of this sheep prior to this article.
Sheep, haven't you? There's a few.
No.
Somebody I was talking to recently actually had them. They were breeding them and selling them. So
they'd be a little easier as a pet if you wanted a pet sheep that you didn't have to worry about shearing.
The trouble is though they shed
sheep. Well, that'd be like any animal, though, like a dog or a cat.
It's like a long-haired dog that's just going to be shedding hair all over the place all the time.
Yeah, but they're in the field. Who cares?
Yeah,
it's
well,
outside,
exactly.
Right? Yeah. So anyway, so this ram sale in New South Wales, the Central Tablelands, there was a record for the sale of a ram, an Australian white sheep, for $165,000.
Yes.
Isn't that crazy? So this was at the 8th annual Tattykeel Australian White stud, I guess, meetup or, some kind of event. And the ram was called White Gold, for obvious reasons.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So it set an Aussie record across all meat sheep breeds. Several other rams, though, also would have broken the previous record at that meetup.
That's about 4 times the average price over the last 4 years for a stud ram. So,
the average stud ram was $40,000 and a flock ram is $15,000. And the sale at this 8th Tattykeel stud meetup thing was $5.5 million worth of, I guess, studs.
And there'll be stud ewes as well. So
Jesus.
Which aren't worth anywhere near as much money, but
Yeah, so the Australian white breed was developed only a decade ago or so by Tattykeel, and it was bred to produce hair instead of wool so that farmers didn't have to pay shearers if they were just interested in raising sheep for meat.
Yes.
Which I thought, makes a lot of sense. I wonder how the genetics, though, differs. I imagine that it's, we think of hair and wool as being these very two different things, like feathers and hair, but I assume that wool is just hair that crinkles and that doesn't fall out seasonally.
And it doesn't fall out as easily. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so all you've had to do is select for a sheep that loses its wool on a regular basis, which would have been the default genetics of the animal, and make sure that the hair is straight.
Yeah, or it doesn't even have to be straight. It just has to fall out.
Yeah.
So that it never gets long enough to become that sort of curly thing.
But it looks these sheep kind of look like Labrador, white Labrador.
They just look
dogs,
like white
right?
Labradors. Yeah, exactly.
So it's pretty cool, but it makes a lot of sense. And I think a big driving factor was apparently the fact that we are obviously in a pandemic, but as a result, we don't have many shearers around. And so you would imagine that despite them being scarce, they're also going to become more expensive to hire, which impacts your, top end when your top margin when you're trying to shear wool or shear sheep that you're going to use for meat in the future. So obviously, if you can just make sure the hair falls out naturally, you don't have to worry about paying shearers at all. And you can just harvest them for meat. So
yeah, and look, the wool from typically from breeds that are made for the meat market, the wool is almost worthless. So yeah, yes, you'll make a little bit of money on it. So, but you'll probably it's probably about cost neutral, I think, in terms of you make your money back on the shearing by selling the wool, but because they're only cut to make the animals' lives easier.
And well, the animals haven't been bred to have good quality wool; they've been bred to have good meat.
Yeah, and typically the ones that they're sacrificing for meat are lambs anyway. They're less than a year old. So they're never going to you don't have the problem with the ones that you're actually sacrificing. The problems you have is the breeding ewes and rams that have to be shorn. So
yeah, but it was interesting they were talking about whether or not it would stand the test of time, because they weren't sure if it was going to be a fad or not. As soon as the pandemic ends, and as soon as restrictions end, are we going to get an influx of shearers where it no longer becomes viable to buy these really expensive Australian white sheep?
They won't be that expensive. Yeah, they won't be that expensive. I think the difference, and I know the article talked about the analogy with the emu market, farming emus. The trouble with farming emus is that there was never a downstream product. That was just speculation on there being a downstream product for emu feathers and for meat. And yeah, there is a market for those, but it's a very small niche market. And so the idea that thousands of people went out there and created emu farms was just never going to work. But in this case, the market is there. We know that the market is there for lambs, for meat, and in this case, all it is an economic decision as to say whether it's going to be worth taking this breed, which saves you money in shearing, or whether you can take a cheaper breed and shear them. So there'll be a balance in the price. Yes, it might be that the $165,000 ram, it's going to take a lot of time over the next few years for that ram to pay his dues back. But who knows? I doubt whether that price will maintain itself. But there will still be value, and there'll still be people who go, "This is much easier. It's much easier to just farm these sheep rather than having ones that we've got to worry about shearing." So, assuming that there is a balance, that there's no significant difference in cost and effort to farm these in comparison with anything else other than the shearing component. I mean, I don't know whether these are more susceptible or less susceptible to disease, or require different, fencing, or, there's all sorts of other things to, keeping sheep that are going to, influence the cost. But assume that they're all equal, then if you can balance the payment for shearing as against not paying for shearing with the price of these, then it'll find its place in the market, I'm sure.
Yeah, I wonder if they get fly struck as much as normal sheep. I don't know what the length of their wool would get to, but I wonder I would like to see one of these sheep at the end, right before it started shedding, at the end of winter, to see what is the actual length of the hair. If they do,
I don't know whether they, the article wasn't, typically was fairly short on, biology of the animal. There was more about the fact that they exist. I don't know whether they are continuous shedders or annuals or seasonal shedders. So if they're continuous, then they're going to have this constant low level of hair over them. The other thing to note is whether you can also have them in a variety of different environments, because often meat sheep are more susceptible, because they don't have the long, fast-growing wool. They're typically more susceptible to cold and frost and those sort of things. So whether they're that's going to be the problem for them, we don't know. So and I don't know enough about the breed itself.
So do you reckon?
An interesting idea.
Do you reckon it'll last? Are you expecting to see that shedding sheep take over the meat industry in Australia?
I don't know that it'll take over. I think it might be that in some circumstances it's going to be economically beneficial to have them, and that's what people are going to choose to do. If it turns out that regardless of the shearing price, these are just producing better quality, cheaper meat, then it's going to be they're going to become much more popular. But
and as you say, it's probably going to matter where you live, and if you live in a place that gets relatively cold temperatures, even if it's only a few days a year, or for a short period of time during the year, you may have to just cut your losses and choose a sheep that grows wool in order to be able to endure that. Whereas if you live somewhere where it's really hot, there's obviously then multiple reasons for you to be like, well, now we don't have to remove the wool because of the heat or anything like that. It just deals with it itself.
Interesting one.
Do you remember any big changes happening with other livestock or other, say, vegetables or fruit in the past for you that have made massive changes or differences in terms of their growing? Like, did you grow up with bananas that had seeds?
No, that was way before my time.
That was before you? Yeah. Do you know of any changes
I've eaten
that happened?
plantains, which we don't get in Australia.
Yeah.
But you go to South America and Central America, and plantains, which are effectively native bananas, I've eaten them, but not in Australia. So.
I can't remember the last time I had grapes that had seeds in them.
Yeah, you're probably right. I think they've just sort of gone off. People just prefer grapes without seeds. And so it's not that those, varieties of grapes are not around, but clearly they're not in the selling them, and they're not in the supermarkets. You may be able to get them at vegetable markets or fruit and vegetable markets and things, but don't know.
Awesome.
The one that comes to mind, which again was a sort of niche market thing, and they're still around, but that was the sheep, the wool sheep that you don't need to shear because they grew a weak spot in their wool. I think it was a change of diet or something. I can't remember the specific instance, but it was something that happened annually where you could change the diet of them and it would create a weak spot in them, and effectively the whole fleece would just fall off.
Wow. And you just go and pick it up.
And so, you'd see these flocks of sheep running around with covers on them. So they were clean and they were covered. And then the fleece would just effectively fall off them.
So it's like a snake shedding its skin or something.
Yeah, and
it comes off in a single piece.
They were just way too expensive to keep. It's sort of this little niche, cutesy little niche market. And I think the quality of the wool is obviously very good. And you get a higher price for it, but it probably doesn't warrant all of the crapping around you got to do in order to get it.
Yeah, chasing the sheep down and grabbing them and then peeling them like a banana.
Take your overcoat off.
Yeah, I can imagine. I guess you'd want more control over it, right?
Yeah, and look, there's always been, certainly within the livestock market, there have always been geographic variations on which breeds of, say, cattle are used for particularly, beef cattle rather than dairy. But the further north you go, the more you get into breeds that cope with tropical environments, hot and humid environments, and are also more resistant to things like ticks and so on. Whereas they don't thrive as well in cold weather, but the cold weather breeds just can't cope as soon as you move to North Queensland. So, I'm
trying to look up chicken change over the years, because that would have been my best example, I think, of changing biology. And this is just selection. But there it is. Okay, so
big breasts.
In 1957, chickens weighed 905 grams when they were obviously harvested to be eaten. 1978, they were 1.8 kilos, so they doubled in size.
Yeah.
And then 2005, they were 4.2 kilos. It's just insane. And so they're like these just Goliaths that I think in the sheds where they're grown, they can't even stand up once they're almost at the being harvested stage. Like they can stand up and walk around a little bit, but they get so tired so quickly because of the muscle mass.
Yeah.
That it is another ethical kind of dilemma.
It is, and they're bred for those chickens. Well, they're roosters, the ones that we kill to eat. They're bred for breast meat mass, so that because there's a huge market in butchered chicken meat, as in not just here's a whole chicken, go and roast it, which used to be you couldn't buy pieces of chicken when I was a kid. You'd go and buy a whole chicken and you'd roast it, or you'd boil it and pull it apart and use it in various things and so on. But now when you go to a butcher's or a supermarket, you can choose, well, I just want the legs, or I want
bone in,
fillets
bone out.
Typically the one that you go and look at the whole chicken display, and 70 or 80% of it will be breast fillets. And then there's the other bits and pieces. It's my understanding that it's mostly those increase in size of breast fillets. I mean, now you're looking at this huge things. You're going to go, does this come from a bloody turkey? What's going on?
Well, and the other tragic thing, I think it was Super Size Me 2 is the documentary that I watched that covered that, where he is effectively trying to open a fast food restaurant but be 100% transparent on everything, the ingredients, where the chicken's grown, how it's treated, and he shows all the bare bones and scars and
all the hormones and
everything. Well, and I think he tries to do it in an organic way, but then it he shows this is going to shoot the price up, blah blah blah. So it was really interesting. But they
you want to pay $40 for a chicken burger?
Well, they were showing though, I think on a yearly basis, they're pulling back a day on the amount of time it takes for this chicken to mature to be harvested, and they're adding a certain amount of weight every single year to the chicken, and that's been gradually happening since the
so they grow
1950s. Yeah, but it's just insane, because he goes to the chicken farms and then also talks about how all the companies that effectively pay farmers to grow the chickens for them, it's almost like indentured servitude, where these companies set it up in a way that all the farmers are kind of fighting amongst one another to get a certain rate, because it's done on a scale. It's not all of them are paid the same. It's whoever gets the highest amount of meat for the least amount of food gets the highest rate. And they can penalize you if they don't like what you're doing, or if you're talking to the wrong people.
Dairy industry as well, which is
owned by,
in Australia, is mostly owned by two, multinational conglomerates.
Yeah,
and they are the only thing they don't do is have dairy cattle. They control every other step.
Well, when you open a bottle of milk, you're probably drinking milk from thousands of cows, right? Because it's just taken from so many farms, mixed together. It would be so interesting to do a DNA test on your average bottle of milk and see how many individuals are in there.
Yeah, but it's they control both the price that they pay to the farmer and the price they sell to the supermarkets, which is where most milk is sold, and or to producers. Well, they own the downstream dairy products like cheese and ice cream and things. They own all of those factories, and that's how they can control the price of milk when it goes to the actual milk product, where it goes to supermarkets. And that sort of oligopoly where you have two big companies that are effectively controlling not just the entire retail market, but the wholesale market that drives the retail market as well. You just shake your head and go, the only people who are getting screwed here are the consumers and the dairy farmers.
Everyone else.
Yeah.
But I think that's an issue we're going to have to overcome with globalization and a lot of these, what would you say, these product chains, right? And working out, because a lot of the time it's the middlemen that are making most of the money and controlling the guys at the bottom and the guys that are at the receiving end of these things. But the problem is that you have a population that wants to pay less and less and less for more and more and more, and expect more and more high quality stuff, and I get hit with that all the time. I'll be like, what do you mean it's $3.50 for 3 liters of milk now? It was $3 the other week. And you're like, mate, it's 3 liters of milk for a few dollars. Yeah. You'll say that, have a whinge about milk, and then go to 7-Eleven and pay $5 for a can of Coke, and you don't even think about it. And you're just like, I'm such a hypocrite. Anyway, good place to leave that one. Thanks, Dad. See you guys next time.
Bye.
Alrighty, you mob, thank you so much for listening to or watching this episode of The Goss. If you would like to watch the video, if you're currently listening to it and not watching it, you can do so on the Aussie English channel on YouTube. You'll be able to subscribe to that. Just search Aussie English on YouTube. And if you're watching this and not listening to it, you can check this episode out also on the Aussie English podcast, which you can find via my free Aussie English podcast application on both Android and iPhone. You can download that for free, or you can find it via any other good podcast app that you've got on your phone. Spotify, podcasts from iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is. I'm your host, Pete. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a ripper of a day, and I will see you next time. Peace!